Hey, how's it going, guys? Hope you had a good weekend. So first thing today, I've got Unit 9's completing the sentence online for you to do. It should work just like synonyms and antonyms. Just go through, type in your answer. Be very careful about spelling. Again, it's picky. If you spell something wrong again for this unit and probably for the next one, let me know and I'll fix it on RenWeb. But start getting in the habit of double checking your spelling. Make sure you spell the words correctly because going forward, I may not necessarily want to go back and fix everything that you misspell. Part of vocab is spelling the word right, so start working on that moving forward. We're going to start reading The Outsiders today. Okay, so we're probably going to do about a chapter a day. Usually the chapters are 15, 20 pages. You've got plenty of time for that. It's a pretty quick read. Text isn't overly small or anything like that. I'll read the first couple of pages of this chapter for you guys today. You can listen along and I'll talk about it a little bit to give you kind of an introduction to what's going on. But in general, I'm not going to read like whole chapters or anything like that because me sitting here reading 18 pages at a time is going to end up running more than 15 minutes most likely. And I won't get much time to actually discuss it. So what I'll usually do is I'll talk about the reading we had the night before, which we haven't had any. So again, I'm going to do a little bit of reading and introduce it. But I'll talk about what we read the night before. I'll ask you a discussion question, which then you'll have to go and answer on Google Classroom. And we'll still probably have some vocab work to do while we're doing this. Again, I want to hit about a unit of vocab per week because with these exercises and everything, I've noticed you guys get them done really quickly. Like I'll post it and it's like people like just completing the assignment all the way down the list. And I know a lot of you are using Quizlet and things like that for it. I don't really mind. Just again, take your time, spell them correctly, but we'll move through vocab quickly because I can't really quiz or test on it in any reasonable way. So posting those assignments and having you do those is probably the closest thing we can get. And I'll still have videos explaining the vocab words, telling you how to use them in sentences and things like that. We may do a little bit of creative writing with them. One class already has from last week. But before I start reading The Outsiders, I want to talk about a few concepts, a few things I want you to keep in mind as we're reading it, because this book does some things that we haven't necessarily seen in the novels we've read so far this year. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is it's obviously a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age novel. We have seen that. You saw that in sixth grade. It's a novel about a young boy who grows up and matures over the course of the novel. He learns a lot of things, and that sounds like the basic plot of pretty much every book we've read. You can just change boy for girl for some of them. But it's usually books targeted at your age are always about this. This book was written by a 16-year-old. She started writing it when she was 15. So it makes sense that that's the type of book she wrote. But it's a good take on it. I appreciate the way that this is written. I think it does some interesting things that we haven't necessarily seen so far. One of those things is with the type of conflict that it uses. So we talked about literary conflicts, man versus man versus God, man versus nature, those sorts of things. And we have had a bit of man versus society in the things we've read. We talked about Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, particularly, and how it tended to fit that mold with the racism and all those different things that we were dealing with in the poverty in that novel. This one is also man versus society, but it's taken from a different angle. It's not based on race. It's based to an extent on poverty, but it's more strictly social classes and the way people divide themselves. But it's a nuanced, which means kind of a more in-depth, a more fair approach to it. It's not one side's evil and one side's not. This book does a good job, I think, of showing the good and the bad on both sides of the conflict that we'll end up with, which I told you in the previous video is the greasers and the socials, um, which is basically the poor versus the rich, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, as you'll see when we go forward. Our main character is Ponyboy Curtis. Again, terrible name. There are a lot of interesting names in this book, and there are a lot of characters you're going to have to keep up with, and a few of them have names that are kind of similar, like Derry and Dally and things like that. So keep a running track on the names. You may want to write them down somewhere and write down kind of the characteristics of certain people and how they're related to one another, because at times it can get a little bit confusing. But one of the things that this book does is it starts in media res is what it's called. It means in the middle of things. It's Latin. So when the book starts off, we don't necessarily get a lot of context in the first page or so. It's just kind of, it starts and it goes from there. And then gradually we get background details and we get a little bit of exposition. But it starts right in the middle of things happening. We get action very quickly in this book, which is something you'll probably appreciate. There aren't 2 or 3 chapters of building up and saying, well, I was born here and my parents did this and blah, 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 blah. We get that, but it's gradual and it's mixed in with the action in a way that I think you'll like. I think it'll help you get into the book a little bit more quickly. Um, Another thing that this book does, it won't start off doing it immediately. It does a bit, but it becomes very important to the themes of the book later on. It does something that's called intertextuality. So what that means, if we can break it down, text, that word in the middle obviously is like book, like a text. In my opinion, you can extend that definition to be anything that's, a piece of art that you can interact with. So a movie, a book, a painting, anything like that. That inter at the beginning, the prefix, means something between, like an interaction between two things. So when you have intertextuality in a book, it's when a book references some other book or a painting or a movie or something like that. S.E. Hinton does this a lot in The Outsiders. She references other books. She references a poem that's extremely important to the themes of the book. She references a certain movie star in the opening lines of the book. And these things are really important. They're not just throwaways. Sometimes we see intertextuality, particularly in books aimed at young adults, and it's just kind of the author showing off and saying, look, I can reference this book because I've read it, or look, I've seen this really famous movie and I can talk about it. S.E. Hinton's not doing that. At least I don't feel like she is. I think she's genuinely trying to make a point with the things she references. I think there's a really important reason why she talks about the things she talks about. So anytime you hear her talk about a book or a movie or anything or another person outside of the book, take note of that. Maybe jot it down somewhere, maybe in the margins of your book. And maybe do a little bit of research and figure out, see if you can find out why you think she's referencing what she is at the time, because I'll definitely talk about it. That'll probably be a lot of our discussion questions. We won't necessarily have a discussion question today. We'll probably start those tomorrow, because I want to give you the day to look over the first chapter, read it, kind of get into the characters and the setting of the novel. Again, it's set in Oklahoma, I think Tulsa, in the 1960s, 60s, I believe. It might be 50s. I think it's the 60s, based on the movie star reference in the first page. But we'll talk about the setting and the characters and things like that moving forward, but I want you to kind of start absorbing those. We'll be introduced to that man versus society conflict almost right away, and we'll talk about that a lot. Now, you will have to watch the videos to get the discussion questions, because on Google Classroom, I'm just going to post discussion question 1, and there's not going to be anything else, and you're going to have to answer the question. And if you post, hey, what's the discussion question? I don't see anything. I'm going to say, have you watched the video? And you're going to say no, and you're going to go watch the video. So just watch the videos. I know all of you aren't watching them or not wanting to watch the whole thing. It's not that much of a time investment. You're sitting at home. You're spending 90% of your day doing whatever you want during this. I know that. You know that. The videos are going to be less than 15 minutes. Most of them are going to be less than 10. Bear with me. All right, so with that said, I'm going to read probably the first 2 or 3 pages and just give us a little bit of context and start talking about it. The opening lines of this book are some of the most famous in all of young adult literature and all of literature, honestly. It's a pretty famous opening paragraph that if you quoted to someone who's pretty well read, they'll be able to tell you what it's from almost immediately. And it is important to the context of the book and what goes on. So try to keep these opening lines in your head going forward. They do matter. All right, so chapter 1. When I stepped out into the bright sunlight from the darkness of the movie house, I had only 2 things on my mind: Paul Newman and a ride home. I was wishing I looked like Paul Newman. He looks tough and I don't, but I guess my own looks aren't so bad. I have light brown, almost red hair and greenish gray eyes. I wish they were more gray, because I hate most guys that have green eyes, but I have to be content with what I have. My hair is longer than a lot of boys wear theirs, squared off in back and long at the front and sides, but I am a greaser and most of my neighborhood rarely bothers to get a haircut. Besides, I look better with long hair. I had a long walk home and no company, but I usually loan it anyway, for no reason except that I like to watch movies undisturbed so I can get into them and live them with the actors. When I see a movie with someone, it's kind of uncomfortable, like having someone read your book over your shoulder. I'm different that way. I mean, my second oldest brother, Soda, who is 16 going on 17, never cracks a book at all, and my oldest brother, Daryl, who we call Derry, works too long and hard to be interested in a story or drawing a picture, so I'm not like them. And nobody in our gang digs movies and books the way I do. For a while there, I thought I was the only person in the world that did, so I loaned it. Soda tries to understand, at least, which is more than Derry does. But then, Soda is different from anybody. He understands everything, almost. Like he's never hollering at me all the time the way Derry is, or treating me as if I was 6 instead of 14. I love Soda more than I've ever loved anyone, even Mom and Dad. He's always happy-go-lucky and grinning, while Derry's hard and firm and rarely grins at all. But then, Derry's gone through a lot in his 20 years, grown up too fast. Soda Pop will never grow up at all. I don't know which way's the best. I'll find out one of these days. Anyway, I went on walking home, thinking about the movie, and then suddenly wishing I had some company. Greasers can't walk alone too much or they'll get jumped, or someone will come by and scream "greaser" at them, which doesn't make you feel too hot, if you know what I mean. We get jumped by the Socias. I'm not sure how you spell it, but it's the abbreviation for the Socials, the Jet Set, the West Side Rich Kids. It's like the term greaser, which is used to class all us boys on the east side. We're poorer than the Socias in the middle class. I reckon we're wilder too. Not like the Socias, who jump greasers and wreck houses and throw beer blasts for kicks and get editorials in the paper for being a public disgrace one day and an asset to society the next. Greasers are almost like hoods. We steal things and drive old souped up cars and hold up gas stations and have a gang fight once in a while. I don't mean I do things like that. Derry would kill me if I got into trouble with the police. Since Mom and Dad were killed in an auto wreck, the three of us get to stay together only as long as we behave. So Soda and I stay out of trouble as much as we can, and we're careful not to get caught when we can't. I only mean that most greasers do things like that, just like we wear our hair long and dress in blue jeans and t-shirts, or leave our shirt tails out and wear leather jackets and tennis shoes or boots. I'm not saying that either Socias or greasers are better. That's just the way things are. I could have waited to go to the movies until Derry or Soda Pop got off work. They would have gone with me, or driven me there, or walked along, although Soda just can't sit still long enough to enjoy a movie, and they bore Derry to death. Derry thinks his life is enough without inspecting other people's. Or I could have gotten one of the gang to come along, one of the four boys Derry and Soda and I have grown up with and consider family. We're almost as close as brothers. When you grow up in a tight-knit neighborhood like ours, you get to know each other real well. If I had thought about it, I could have called Derry and he would have come by on his way home and picked me up, or Two-Bit Matthews, one of our gang, would have come to get me in his car if I had asked him, but sometimes I just don't use my head. It drives my brother Derry nuts when I do stuff like that, because I'm supposed to be smart. I make good grades and have a high IQ and everything, but I don't use my head. Besides, I like walking. All right, so I'm going to stop with the reading there. We get a lot of information in these first couple pages. First thing we should probably notice is that this is a first-person narration. This is Ponyboy talking about himself, and you get it pretty unfiltered. It's kind of a modernist take where you get almost his stream of consciousness. He talks about the things that he thinks and feels, and it's very private, very personal, and it's very much the way you would talk to like a close friend. It's not this stilted, really reserved, like, and then I walked down the street, and then I blah, blah, blah. It's like the way you would have a conversation with somebody you were really close to that you knew really, really well, who you knew would understand you. That's an interesting take that, again, we haven't necessarily gotten so far. It's almost confessional, kind of like a journal that somebody would write. So we find out that he is an orphan. He lives with his two brothers, Derry and Soda. Ponyboy himself's kind of an interesting kid. You would probably say he's kind of weird, kind of nerdy, despite being around all this gang stuff and being a greaser, having long hair, wearing leather jackets and all of that. He's an artsy kid. He likes books. He likes going to the movies by himself so he can really kind of watch the movie and examine it and get into that world that the actors are in. Really like kind of an intellectual kid. Like he says, I have a high IQ. I make good grades, but I don't use my head. So he's kind of what I would call cerebral, which means he walks around stuck in his own head and he doesn't pay attention to what's going on in front of him. You probably know a lot of people like that. I know some of you who are like that, who will probably relate to Ponyboy a lot. He says Derry, on the other hand, his older brother. He's very businesslike. He doesn't care about reading a story or drawing a picture or anything like that. He's work, work, work. Everything's business. He's kind of the opposite of Ponyboy, and that dynamic's really important going forward. He says Soda, though, is really sensitive, really tries with him. He's the middle brother. He's the person in the world that Ponyboy feels the closest to, the one that he trusts the most. Ponyboy himself is 14, a hair older than most of you guys are. I don't think any of you are 14 yet. He's already given us this conflict between greasers and Socias. He says, the greasers, we wear t-shirts and jeans and boots and leather jackets, and we wear our hair long, and we look, kind of like hoods, and we do gang fights, and we hold up gas stations, that sort of thing. He says, I don't, which makes you question if he's saying we do all these things, but then he says, I don't. Is he really a greaser? And that's something that you'll see as we go on that's kind of in the back of his mind, do I really fit in with this crowd? And it's something that his brothers think about and the people around him think about. And then he talks about the Socias. He says they throw parties, they drink beer, they're rich, their families are wealthy, they have nice cars and nice houses and all of this. Basically, they do terrible things just the same as us, but they're rich and they get by with it. That's his perspective right now. We'll see if that changes going forward when he has some more interactions with them. His parents were killed in a car accident. Like I said, we see he's gone to the movie theater by himself. He's walking home. And he says it's dangerous to be by yourself if you're a greaser. The Socials will come by and, somebody will scream greaser at you if you're lucky. If you're not, you might get mugged. Foreshadowing, you're going to find out in a couple pages how it ends up for him. One other thing, he says, I wanted to be like Paul Walker. Or not Paul Walker, I'm sorry. That guy's from Fast and Furious. Paul Newman. Paul Newman, let me see if I can flip the camera around. He was an actor from... It's not going to flip for me. Here. He's an actor who was famous in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, known as kind of a rugged, tough guy actor. And Ponyboy says, I want to look like Paul Newman. I want to be built like Paul Newman. I want to be tough. I want to be a movie star type, which is the opposite of what he is. He's kind of scrawny, kind of nerdy, and that's really not his persona. That's not who he is. It's more what his oldest brother Derry would be like, and we'll see how that develops going forward. Again, how him wanting to be something he's not kind of drives him and pushes him to see if he changes or not, see if he maybe acts out of character in a few places. So pay attention to that. The main characters he's mentioned so far that you need to keep up with, obviously himself, Ponyboy Curtis, although I'm not even sure we've gotten his name yet. Keep up with Soda, his middle brother, who's the kind one he's close to, and then Derry, his oldest brother, who's kind of the tough, rugged type, very business oriented. He's mentioned Two Bit Matthews, but he's not terribly important yet. You'll want to keep up with all the members of their gang as we go forward, but for now, if you've got the three brothers and finished the first chapter, you should be okay. I think it's about 18 pages. I read the first three and a little bit of the fourth. If you have any questions about it, any comments, anything you're interested with it, anything you want me to answer, if you didn't understand any of the terms I use, like in media res or Bildungsroman or intertextuality or anything like that, you can ask me. Just make sure you do completing the sentence by midnight tonight. This video is a little bit over, but you'll be okay. Most videos won't be, because again, I'm not necessarily going to read multiple pages to you. Most of the time, I'll just discuss what we've already read, and I'll talk about some vocab. That'll be it. Some of these videos while we're doing the Outsiders will stretch close to 15 minutes, but this will probably be the only one that goes over. At least I'll try to make that the case. See you guys.